upon society with our games. They call it impiety and lack of propriety and quite a variety of...
The next topic I wanted to hit, and maybe you can contribute to this, is the whole idea of the Bible and some of the problems there. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but some things need to be mentioned. There's a quote from Paul, 1 Corinthians 1:14. If Christ is not risen, your faith is in vain, and that's certainly true.
Hey, that's one of the few things that I agree with.
Right, right.
Paul.
So I'd like to mention three things with regard to the Bible. First off, the earliest gospel, which is Mark, the earliest versions of Mark ended at verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 8, which is actually a real ending. It's really how it ended. It wasn't like some fragment where they were missing the rest of it. And this is in the 4th century, and this ends with the women leaving the tomb and saying nothing.
Well, what was in the 4th century?
This first version of the gospel that they found.
No, Mark is late 1st century. The oldest written copies that we have are dated from the 4th century,
right,
but they're reliably dated back to late 1st century. I don't want somebody to call in and say, "Oh, no, this wasn't in the 4th century."
Okay, well, thanks for the correction. That's helpful. So what you see here is by the 5th century, there's actually 4 different endings of Mark, and all of them are dealing with this resurrection thing. And so this begs the question of, and the original version didn't have much in the way of a resurrection. It had some stranger sitting in the tomb saying, "Oh, you're looking for Jesus, he done resurrected," which is, some anonymous person. So apparently that wasn't convincing for the early Christians, so they had to embellish it and add more stuff. So apparently the original author didn't know about this other stuff, or he didn't think it was important, or there was a need for more spin to add more witnesses. This is where all these witnesses and all these appearances show up. That's in the later version of it. So it looks to me very much like an embellishment, right? An embellishment to make it more exciting, more convincing, these sorts of things. And if it's an embellishment, it's not true. So there's other reasons to think it's not true. So there's also in Christianity, there's no agreement on whether Jesus bodily resurrected. If the body if the body disappeared, where did it go? Right? Because dead people don't disappear. We know that.
Actually, they do if you wait long enough.
If you wait long enough, right? It kind of decays. So the lack of the body, in my opinion, serves as the evidence that Jesus never existed in the first place. Right? If you don't have a body at all, and maybe this is why the Christians always ask the atheists, have you found Jesus?
He was behind the sofa the whole time.
Okay. The third thing that needs to be mentioned is that we have the different Gospels and the whole story of the killing and the resurrection and all these things, and they don't agree. Okay, so there's really sort of different versions. They cannot be reconciled. Dan Barker has a famous challenge of please put all these in chronological order and make them make sense, and nobody has responded to that.
Well, nobody's been able to do it satisfactorily.
Right.
This challenge of reconciling the resurrection account, the Easter account, I mean, it grossly predates even Dan Barker. This is, from the dawn of Christianity, people have been trying to do this, or at least since the 4th or 6th century. And there are some people who claim to have been able to do it, and I've read their accounts, and they're wrong. I mean, they're just, what you end up doing is picking and choosing.
Right.
And we've talked before about what were Jesus's last words on the cross, and it's different in each of the 4 Gospels. And so the standard reply from most of the apologists is, well, none of them say that were Jesus's last words. This is just different people recording things that he said near the end. And yet most of the Gospels actually say, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" and then he died, or "Into thy hands I commend my spirit," and then he died. It's implied that they're last words, and they're right. The apologists are right. It's not critical as to whether or not those were the exact last words or not. The point is that there are a whole bunch of inconsistencies in this story. We've got a story written by 4 different authors. We know who none of those authors are. The only thing we're certain of is that they're not the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that the church slapped on there to make them, more appealing to tradition. But they weren't those individual disciples. We have no idea who they were. There's no autograph copies. They don't agree on all the information. There are inconsistencies. They also have factual errors with regard to known history. There's not a single significant event from the life of Jesus that we can corroborate in any extra-biblical first century contemporary source. Not one. Not a birthday, not an event. You can't find somebody else who talked about walking on water or loaves and fishes or turning water into wine. Nobody reported any of this stuff outside of the Bible. Nobody talks about at the time of death, or before the birth, the mystical star that guided the wise men. That's not reported anywhere else. Nobody talks about.
It exists in all these other religions, by the way.
Yeah,
that's another element that's very common around that time.
There's not a single element of this story that's confirmable outside of here, and really, and they say, well, that's because we collected the best stories and we put them in the Bible, and it's unfair to disregard the Bible. Okay, I agree. It's unfair on the face of it to disregard the Bible out of hand, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm saying there's no idea who wrote any of this. We have no way of verifying it, no autograph copies, and not only are there inconsistencies, but there are known forgeries in there. This whole issue that you brought up with Mark 16 verses 9 through 20, that is slapped on after the fact to add a few more appearances of Jesus and a kind of spin on the Great Commission that ends up being the basis for Pentecostal churches. Because in that 9 through 20 passage, it says you'll know these people because they'll cast out demons in my name, they'll handle deadly serpents and be able to drink poisonous things and not die. I mean,
so they're false prophets.
Yeah, I mean somebody has slapped this on after the fact, and then somebody else said, let's make a religion out of that. It's in there, and the earliest manuscripts for the Gospel of Mark don't include that passage.
Well, what annoys me with this is you point out these inconsistencies, and then Christians will say, "Oh, well, they're like a bunch of different viewpoints, and because they all kind of sort of agree, it must be true."
Yeah.
And what is it? What is it?
Yeah. There is no it there.
Right.
There's this kind of quasi narrative that almost tells you something. When was Jesus born? Was it, as Matthew's pointing out, when Herod was ruling? Or was it 10 years later, as it's reported in other Gospels, when Quirinius has taken a census?
Well, as far as I know, the birth story is made up much later, right?
You can't, but the point is that you can't, Jesus couldn't have been born at both those times. Those times are mutually exclusive. Herod died in either 4 or 6 BC, and Quirinius' census didn't take place until 4 or 6 CE or AD.
Well, there's 3 different birth lines for Jesus in the Bible. It's like, boy, one wasn't enough. We need 3 conflicting ones.
Yeah.
Got to relate him somehow back to King David.
Audubon Society with our games. They call it impiety and lack of propriety and quite a variety of unpleasant